Behind me, a 2013 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited and a big grassy field with some woods back there. And it will be so much fun to romp and stomp and tear through there the exact ways that Jeeps were meant to be, all the way since they started back in World War II. But this is my daughter's elementary school, and those are school buses. And ever since Jeep added this second set of doors to the Wrangler back in its 2007 redesign and turned it into the Wrangler Unlimited 4-door, that's been the primary use of these vehicles, and the sales figures show it. Yes, you can still take a Wrangler off-road, and we will show you all the mechanicals that are still there to allow you to do it. But more importantly, why don't we look into how the Wrangler actually performs the way most people use them? And that is commuter, school bus, elementary school, kids, and you. Let's get into some of the mechanicals of what make a Jeep Wrangler, and we are not going to start under the hood because that's actually the least Jeep-like of every part of this. There are two major elements. First, the look. This squared off body style and the convertible top, that leads to a very distinct Jeep look and also a very distinct Jeep drive. The amount of wind noise you have at 80 miles an hour is completely different as an experience compared to any other vehicle you're going to buy. But perhaps even more distinct is the suspension system. If you go underneath, you will see that Jeep has rigidly stuck with a rigid front axle, one axle that goes straight across. Now, the solid axle suspension design was also shared with a lot of other legendary off-road vehicles like the original Land Rover, Range Rover, and other Land Rover products like the Defender and the Discovery, and also Toyota's Land Cruiser. But they've all moved on. The Land Cruiser has independent front suspension now, and Land Rover products are independent suspension front and rear. Now, there's a very basic physical advantage off-road to rigid axles. They work like seesaws. Imagine this is one tire and this is the other, and you put one on a rock. It not only brings the one tire up, but it forces the other one down so both tires get traction. That's great for what off-roaders call articulation and keeping all four tires on the dirt or the rock to get traction. But shh, there is one other advantage. It is very easy to lift a very simple suspension system like this. You can throw a set of coil springs on this machine, lift it up, fit bigger tires. That's what most people like to do. Jeep obviously has to fit all the government regulations and make the Jeep the size that it comes stock, but it's very easy to upgrade these and put on larger tires, which most people like to do. Much easier than if you had independent suspension. Finally, let's get to the engine. Now, a decidedly Jeep-like way to access it. You still have to remove these hood latches, but while getting to the engine is a decidedly Jeep-like affair, the engine itself is not. Yes, it says Jeep right on it, but this is a double overhead cam, 4-valve per cylinder V6 with a large bore and a short stroke. All of those things lead up to rather high revving power. Now, it's great in many Chrysler applications, such as the front-wheel drive Chrysler Pacifica minivan, but this is not an engine designed specifically for the Wrangler. And old school Wrangler fans might remember the 4-liter inline 6, which was dropped under the hood of the YJ Wrangler in 1991. Even before that, they had the 4.2-liter inline 6 under the Wrangler, and then the TJ Wrangler in the 90s and 2000s had that inline 6 as well. That engine was built like a tractor. It was super durable, and it had a ton of low-end torque. It also made those Wranglers feel fast back in the day, but here's the problem. Government regulations and the fact that they added 4 doors and a lot more size to this machine means this Jeep weighs 1,000 pounds more than that old TJ. So don't fool yourself into thinking that that engine was stronger. It just didn't have to pull around as much. This engine has 285 horsepower. There's some big V6s pushing 300 horsepower now, but it's certainly in the ballpark, and it feels pretty sprightly for what it is around town. You won't have any problem running interstate speeds with this engine in the Jeep. When they first came out with these 4 doors in 07, they had this old minivan engine, which was a 2-valve per cylinder pushrod 3.8 liter that only had 202 horsepower. It was so slow. Game-changing difference with this engine under the hood of this Jeep. Not only is it much faster, more powerful, it also is much smoother, better control of noise and vibration harshness. Massive difference in how the Jeep drives with this engine. But off-roaders would tell you they would love to have a little bit more grunt. Off-road low-end power is different than the low-end power people talk about on the street. I'm talking 900 RPM, 1000 RPM. Idling over rocks, it's not the engine's strong point. It'll get the job done, but not in that torquey way that the old 4-liter inline 6 did. Nice on the road, okay off-road, which is a bit of a contrast to the rest of the machine. Let's get into it by driving it. Okay, let's go driving in the Jeep Wrangler. I've got kid in the back because that's really what Wranglers are used for. My basic view on the Jeep is People think that they're buying a Jeep because they want to blast through sand and mud and climb over rocks, but for the most part, they're going to use it as a daily driver. We all wish that we had an 8-car garage and the budget to pick different vehicles like we pick different jackets or shoes for each day. But for the most part, you need one vehicle to fill a variety of roles. And when you add a second set of doors to a Jeep, you suddenly can use it for family duty and Jeep duty as well. But again, you have to use it for family duty. And how does it perform on the road? Well, there's a couple things to keep in mind. As I mentioned, that Pentastar V6, it gets out of the way. You don't think about it a ton. It's not overly fast, but the machine is certainly quick enough to do anything you need it to do. And to me, at least, it has surprising noise and vibration control, even for a vehicle that has a windshield you could fold down and a top that has little to no insulation. At most road speeds, the Jeep is surprisingly quiet, actually. But when you do start driving it, you notice some of the compromises inherent to this machine. It's those solid axles. Remember the seesaw effect that I mentioned that allowed the vehicle to keep the tires connected to the dirt or rocks when you're off-road? Well, it leads to some strange compromises on the road. Now, the first one you're gonna hear about is steering. Recirculating ball type steering was quite popular in machines back in the 1970s. They've all moved on to rack and pinion steering designs. This steering is slow. It has a decent sense of straight ahead, but not nearly as good as most modern vehicles, so it takes a little more attention at the wheel at highway speeds even to go straight, and there is absolutely no road feel through the steering wheel at all. So you're never gonna feel the tires breaking loose, any sort of performance type driving, completely out of the question with this vehicle. It's not fun. Now, a lot of that slowness is built into the steering on purpose, so when you hit obstacles off-road, you're isolating yourself from that. So again, a necessary compromise. That's part of the solid axle suspension, but the bigger part is that seesaw, or what they call in engineering terms, head toss. That was a very, very small bump right there. In fact, it was so small, I didn't even see it, I didn't even notice it. Yet there we are, getting pitched back and forth, left and right, ever so slightly. People talk about ride quality in vehicles all the time, and that's generally just a balance of how stiff or soft the suspension is. With a Wrangler, you're dealing with another element. You're dealing with the side-to-side, much more so than any other vehicle with independent suspension, and it doesn't help that this has an extremely high center of gravity. So meaning when you feel that head toss, you're not getting it down here, you're getting it all the way up here. So everything is exaggerated compared to a low center of gravity. I will say that the latest generation of Jeeps to come out in 2018, the JL line, they've done a much better job of tightening the turning radius and reducing the head toss. The suspension is getting to the point. They've tamed the solid axles where it rides and handles fairly well. There are times when you will drive the newer JL Jeep and actually find it fun to drive in a traditional manner. In these older Jeeps, it's fun to drive for a completely different reason. It's because it feels like nothing else. You notice every bump in the road and you have to compensate for it yourself. And there is some character to that, especially when you cannot get any other vehicle that drives like this anymore because they've all abandoned this type of engineering. And I kind of like it, especially when you contribute the manual transmission, and again, how connected to the drive you are because of that. And then if you start taking doors and windows topped off, fold the windshield down, now you have a connection to the elements and to your machine that you would not get in any other vehicle you can buy today. So now we know some of the inherent compromises and the pros and cons that they bring, but the real question you have to ask yourself is it worth it? I'm going to be using the Jeep on the road to bring the kids to school a lot. Can I live with it? I say you can. All the things I'm talking about are probably about 20% out of the 100% of this vehicle performs horribly and awful pie. It means that if your generic sedan you can take your kids to school is an A+, maybe this is a B. It's absolutely acceptable and livable. It's not a machine that you couldn't handle driving every single day. And for most people, they don't even want to look at this from a rational perspective. They just want to say, it's head versus heart, it's science versus art. I want what I want. I'm not going to buy what I need. What I need is a minivan, or I need a sedan, or I need a crossover SUV, but I want a Jeep. And if that's what I want, can I live with the compromises? I think you can, except for one other thing you've got to think about. I've got to put gas in this right now, and the gas mileage is atrocious. It's worse than a lot of full-size pickups, which have a phenomenal advantage in practicality, and also they're not too bad from an image perspective, and a lot of people are buying Jeeps or pickups for that reason. So the gas mileage on a Jeep, there's not much they can do about that. This machine is very square and very unaerodynamic, and it leads to a lot of other compromises to help make it work, and those lead to compromises on fuel economy. Its tires are huge, they're heavy, and there's a lot of off-road running gear that is barely used by a lot of people. That adds weight, and the aerodynamics is the real killer. Jeep Grand Cherokee, which is actually heavier than this but is more aerodynamic, is going to get you a couple more miles per gallon with the same engine on the highway. So that's the main compromise you got to ask yourself. Can I deal with a little bit of head toss, maybe a 20% worse ride handling combination? Can I deal with more noise on the interstate? And can I deal with a little worse gas mileage? Not huge compromises to have something that's so fun and so elemental. Now there goes a Ferrari. Don't you think he's dealing with some sacrifices too? Is that a perfect daily driver? No, but a Ferrari. Ah, the heart and soul inside that machine. Jeeps have it too. They have emotion. They tug at the heartstrings. There's something to be said for that, and I think it outweighs the drawbacks, even when all you're doing is driving to the gas station or taking your kid to school.